Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Developing Your Leadership Flex. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. And so, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. And second, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. Awesome. Texas, Miami, Atlanta, San Francisco, Ireland, Seattle, Washington, Maryland. Welcome, everyone. So great to see you all here. And before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls just to step back and see how everyone's doing today. So this first poll is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? Give everyone a few moments to submit a response here. Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, looks like 2/3 optimistic, 1/3 surviving. All right, definitely keep that in mind for our conversation today. Thank you for sharing. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second one. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? This one will tell us a little bit about your current entrepreneurial needs so we can continue providing relevant content. Give it a few more moments. Thank you for participating. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Sales. Oops, sales in the lead. All right, sales in the lead. Marketing and team close behind, all across the board. All right, we will take this into account as we develop new programs for all of you. I'm going to stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Michael Myers, mentor in residence and lecturer at McGuire Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Arizona and co-founder of 05 Advisors. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's certainly my pleasure to be here as well. I said good morning, but I noticed a few folks in the chat are dialing in from as far away as Iran, so certainly it's late evening for you. I appreciate you spending the time in your evening to join us. I know the second poll asked what keeps you awake at night. Team was one of the answers, and that's what we're going to be spending this morning's session talking about, is team and your leadership style, and how do you best lead your team. Before we get going, though, let me just create my own poll framework. So this QR code will lead you to the poll. I have 7 or 8 questions that I'm going to ask through this morning's session. And if you want to participate in that, go ahead and take a snap of that QR code. If that QR code doesn't work, you can also type in the URL that's to the left of the screen. I'll give you just 15 seconds to get set up doing that. Okay, let's go. So by way of background, I know Michelle covered a little bit of this, but let me dive into my background in a little bit more detail. So I spent about 20 years at Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft when I first joined the company in their M&A, specifically venture integration. So post M&A activity after Microsoft acquired a company, my role was to help make sure that technology actually got dispersed throughout the company, whether that was leveraging existing IP or figuring out how engineering talent was better utilized across the company, those kinds of things. So I was very familiar with the entrepreneurial landscape because one of the very first companies that I worked with after Microsoft acquired them was a company called WebTV that was based down in Silicon Valley. And I'll tell you a little bit about my own entrepreneurial journey before Microsoft here in a couple slides. Currently, though, since retiring from Microsoft, I'm a lecturer and mentor in residence at the University of Arizona, the McGuire Center for Entrepreneurship down in Tucson. I'm also on the board of a social entrepreneurship accelerator in Boulder, Colorado called the Watson Institute. And then lastly, as Michelle mentioned, I helped co-found with 4 other founders a very small boutique startup advisory service called O5 Advisors. We're not headquartered anywhere. Two of us live in Europe. One lives on the East Coast. One is about to move to Hawaii and so forth. So we're very much a work from home, remote working team. I'm also a husband and a dad. I'm very active outdoors as well. The very last thing that I'd really love for you to do, if you're so inclined, is reach out to me on LinkedIn. I really have a passion for entrepreneurship. I would love to understand what you're working on, and if there's any way that I can help at all, very happy to extend that help. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Mike J. Miles, LinkedIn, you'll find me. I happened to work at Microsoft, as I mentioned, for about 20 years. And these are all the places around the world where I either lived or had significant software engineering teams. So quite a few places around the world. And the reason I mention that is the stuff that I'm going to cover here next actually is fairly ubiquitous. You know, there isn't much cultural differentiation in some of the leadership and team development topics that I'm going to cover this morning. If you happen to live in a country where you don't think what I'm saying resonates in your culture, I would love to understand that as well. Also, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have that conversation. But by and large, I think everything that I'm about to cover this morning really is global. It's fairly ubiquitous across the world. So I want to lead with this question. So tell me why you think startup leadership is so difficult. And we'll give about 30 seconds for you to respond to this poll. Yeah, wearing multiple hats, certainly. Many people don't understand what leadership is. Okay, yeah, I get that. Let's see, there's no procedures or manuals. Yeah, I mean, by definition, entrepreneurs are paving new roads, new trails. And so you're the one that's building the manual in a lot of ways. Wearing multiple hats. Let me tell you why I think, here's the results of the poll. Let me tell you why I think startup leadership is so difficult. And there's really 5 reasons in my mind. The first is limited resources. By definition, you almost don't have enough money. You rarely have enough people. And there's probably not enough time in the day to accomplish the things you're trying to accomplish. Constant change, by definition, you're trying to evolve and achieve product market fit. And once you do that, you're trying to sell the product in hopefully new and interesting markets. And you might need to change the pricing structure or partner with new partners. Everything is always in flux in early stage companies. There's multiple stakeholders. If you became an entrepreneur because you thought you were going to be in charge, boy, did you make a big career mistake. You quickly find out that there are so many people calling the shots when you're leading a startup organization that you no longer feel in charge. Between managing customers and partners and your employees and your investors, there's a lot of people that have direct influence on how you spend your day. There's lots of ambiguity, mostly as a result of the 3 things I talked about before. But the thing that we're going to talk about today is high-risk leadership. High-risk leadership, that high risk is the thing that I want to focus on. It's a very visible role. If you fail in your startup, lots of people know. So there's a lot of tension and stress that comes with that. Let me give you a little bit of catalyst for this session as well. So before I joined Microsoft, that amazingly good-looking guy in the right-hand side of the screen is me with my at that point I think 6-month-old son, and I was working for a company called Captura, and Captura was post-product, post-profit, and we were pre-IPO. We were in the process of roadshowing with investors and banks that were going to help take us public. We had already raised about $36 million, which in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that was a lot of money to raise pre-IPO. And then our customers were Global 2000 size customers. So name a brand that comes to mind, they were likely one of our customers. Ford, Shell, Pfizer, et cetera, were many of our customers. And we thought at the time that we were a stellar company. In a lot of ways we were. Our singular focus was taking the company public. We were going to go public on the NASDAQ. We were aiming to go public before the end of 2001. And we were well on our way to do that for the reason that I mentioned in the previous slide. But for those that remember, 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened September 11th, 2001. Among the things that happened, I mean, there was a lot of dramatic, significant issues that resulted from that. But the venture markets and the stock markets crawled to a halt. We were no longer able to go public. We ended up selling ourselves to our closest competitor for about 10 cents on the dollar of the money that we had raised to date, and we ended up laying off our entire team. So hopefully nothing like this dramatic happens to you in your entrepreneurial journey, but this was to me an opportunity to reflect. Like, was I the best leader in that organization that I could have been? Was I taking care of my health? Was I really understanding the impact that that startup was having on my family, my marriage, and my friendships? And so the thing that I realized 20-something years ago was that focusing on yourself first, and then your team, and then your business was really the thing that I should have been doing, instead of just focusing on the business and taking the company public. So with that in mind, I'm going to share some things that check the boxes in taking care of yourself and taking care of your team over the next few slides. The thing I want to start with now or focus on now is who are you? So the next poll question is this one: what determines your success? What are the things that determine your success? I believe I set this poll question up so you can answer multiple times. So feel free to do that. I'll leave this poll question up for about 30 seconds or so as well. Yeah, for those that may be wondering, I used this poll question once before. Style is not what you're wearing, it's how you're showing up. So nobody really cares what you're wearing as long as you're appropriate for whatever venue you're in. So don't think of style as dress code or how you're showing up or what fancy car you're driving. Okay, it turns out that this was a little bit of a trick question, because all of these answers play a role. There isn't one single answer. Your success as a leader, I think, is largely determined by these 5 things: your purpose, your values, your leadership modes, and I called that style on the previous poll question, but leadership modes or leadership style, your growth mindset, and your investment in your own professional development. I think those 5 things determine your success as a leader. We're going to cover everything but values in this morning's discussion. That's why values is grayed out. Values, I think we could be spending another 40 minutes or so talking just about values. So I'm not going to talk about that this morning, but I will touch on the other 4. So first of all, purpose. Let's talk a little bit about purpose. I love this quote: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Through the Looking Glass, book by Lewis Carroll. Many of you are familiar with that quote. Many of you are also familiar with this model. The Venn diagram of I call it professional purpose. But this model really is, I hope for many of you, a roadmap on how you really dial in and feel like you're working in a role that gives you or helps fulfill some of your purpose. Many of us start our careers focusing on maybe what your strengths are or what you get paid for. And if you can intersect those 2 things, what your strengths are and what you get paid for, that's kind of your profession. Whether you feel purpose in that profession or not is a different question. But many of us in our early in our careers, that's where we optimize the roles that we have. If you can later figure out what you enjoy doing and intersect that as well, now you're starting to feel a little bit more job satisfaction. You're starting to really dial in to align what you enjoy doing with what your strengths are and what you get paid for. And then the very last thing is, if you can work in a role where you truly believe that the world needs what you're doing, needs the results of the work that you're putting in, that's when I think you achieve your full purpose. So this is one lens that I'd encourage you to think about, is how do you work toward your purpose? And you're not going to dial it all in one day, in one career choice. And in fact, for me right now, I'm not sure I've entirely optimized all 4 circles, even though I spent 27 years of my career working in technology. I'm not sure that I've reached my full purpose and intersected effectively all 4 quadrants. So don't worry that you're not there yet. It's kind of a journey, not a destination, but I'd encourage you to use this lens when you're looking for your roles and looking for the startups that you're about to found as well. The next thing I want to focus on a little bit is leadership mode. Some of you might know of this as leadership style, but I'm going to call it mode here, just to make sure there's no confusion between style and mode. And the quote here is, one of the many major problems with governing people is that of whom you get to do it, or rather who manages to get people to let you do it to them. So the idea there, Douglas Adams in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, was really talking about how sometimes people that are being led feel victimized by the leader because they're applying the wrong style, the wrong leadership mode. And so, word to the wise, identify the leadership mode that's kind of most appropriate. So that's what this next section is going to focus on. So here's the leadership modes that come to my mind. So there's a few different leadership mode taxonomies. This one is one that resonates most with me. And there's 6. There's 6 different leadership modes. Affiliative, which is hard for me to say, where you're really focusing on your team. Your team is by far your highest priority. That sounds good on paper, but we'll talk about some challenges with that. Visionary, those are the people that set a vision, and that vision is so exciting and so compelling that they're able to get a lot of people to follow them and helping to achieve that vision. Commanding is a lot of, hey guys, this is what we're doing today. I want you to show up at 8 o'clock, and the first thing we're going to do is X, Y, and Z, and then at 10 o'clock, we're going to shift over to A, B, and C. That's commanding. Pace setting is do as I do. Look, I'm going to set an example. I'm going to come in at 6 o'clock every morning. I'm going to have my cup of coffee. I'm going to spend 30 minutes doing my email, and then we're going to get to work. Without directly telling people what to do, showing up as an example is one of the hallmarks or one of the characteristics of a pace setter leader. And then coaching. Coaching is a bit like the democratic style that we'll talk about in just a second. And that is, look, guys, what you're doing isn't quite working. Have we tried alternatives? Are there other ways that we could look at this? Have you tried it this way? Look, our competition is doing this thing. Maybe we could do the same thing. That's coaching. And then lastly, democratic is, hey, everybody, we have a decision to make. I'd love to hear from each of you about how you think we decide. Do we decide yes, or do we decide no? Do we go after this customer, or do we go after this market segment? That's democratic. These are pretty self-explanatory. And we're not going to go into them in much more detail, but I did want to ask this question, and that is, what do you think the best leadership style is? What do you think the best leadership style is? Okay, we'll give it about 7 more seconds here. Okay, that's great. Great. So coaching, visionary, democratic, pace setting, affiliative, commanding. I'm going to guess, I'm not going to call anybody out. I'm going to guess that for many of you, you're answering this question in a way that you would like to show up or like to be recognized for. And it may not be your strongest leadership mode. Right? If that's true for you, then the next couple of comments are directed to you. I'll tell you, back when I was working at Captura, the nonprofit the startup that I was working at before 9/11, my default leadership mode was commanding. I was hell-bent that we were going to go public, and I was going to drag the team kicking and screaming, working 20 hours a day, 6 days a week to get there. I was very much commanding. That was my default leadership mode. So what's the best leadership mode? That was the poll question. So I'll tell you a couple things. The first thing is, it really depends. I hope or expect that as part of your entrepreneurial journey, you're going to need each one of those 6 leadership modes, depending on what's going on. If you're delivering for a very important customer and the deadline is tomorrow, you might find it appropriate to shift into a democrat and into a commanding mode. That might be okay. If you're trying to decide, hey, where are we going to spend our next morale event? We're going to take the team out, we're going to go out for dinner or drinks or go-karting or play miniature golf or hot air ballooning or whatever you're going to do for your morale event, you might shift into more of a democratic mode. So it really depends on the situation. The 2 things that leaders need to flex for. The first is interpreting what the team needs at the time. Are you working up to a deadline? Does the team really need some direct instructions about deadlines and quality expectations and deliverables? Or is it less structured and a little bit more open-ended, where you can shift into a more democratic leadership mode? Okay, so interpretation and adaptation are the 2 skills that really come to my mind when I'm thinking about leadership modes. It's not about being the best commanding leader or the best democratic leader. It's about understanding what leadership mode is needed and being able to shift into that mode. Okay. The next thing, somewhat related to that, is growth mindset. So growth mindset, the guiding quote for this section is that I've learned so much from my mistakes that I'm thinking of making a few more. And that quote kind of calls to mind the essence of a growth mindset. Making mistakes and failing at things in and of itself is not a bad thing. As long as you take the opportunity to reflect on those mistakes and figure out how you're going to avoid making those same mistakes and get better, either as a leader or help your team get better as an organization. So back when I first joined Microsoft, Steve Ballmer had recently become the CEO. And during Steve Ballmer's entire tenure as CEO, the stock price dropped about in half. I started, the stock price was about $60 a share. When Steve Ballmer left as CEO, the stock price was down to about $30 a share-ish, 60-ish, 30-ish, okay? Satya Nadella became the CEO back in 2014. And since then, the stock price, I don't know what it is today, it's probably $320 a share, something like that. It's grown exponentially since Satya Nadella took over as CEO. The key reason why, at least that Satya gives credit for that dramatic improvement in stock price and shareholder value, is this shift from the mentality that Microsoft had as kind of know-it-alls. Look, we have a monopoly in the operating system space and in the office productivity space with Microsoft Office, and in software development tools, in Visual Studio, and all of these things. We're such a dominant player. We must know what we're doing. And if customers disagree with us, it's our job to educate them about our way of thinking. That was Steve Ballmer's ethos in a nutshell. He managed the company by scorecard. Look, over the next quarter, I'm expecting you to increase sales by 5%. I'm expecting to go into these new markets. those scorecards was how he drove that business. It was not about developing new products. It was about really growing existing product lines, the business around revenue around those existing product lines. Okay? And because of that, Microsoft missed out for a long time on the internet, on smartphones, on a number of other business units that big competitors actually came in and took over that business that Microsoft had every opportunity to lead in. Microsoft was the first one that came out with a smartphone, but the way we envisioned that smartphone really was just a miniaturized desktop or miniaturized laptop. It wasn't at all the smartphone that we all recognize today that Apple has. So Satya came in and he said, instead of being know-it-alls, we're going to be learn-it-alls. We're going to be more humble. We're going to understand what our customer needs are and how they're evolving. We're going to experiment with new products and new businesses and new markets. And that mentality, that culture shift that Satya invested in is the big reason that both he and shareholders credit Microsoft, reward Microsoft for that cultural change. Yeah. So the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset is illustrated in this graphic that I borrowed from I believe Carol Dweck. I'm not sure who I got this from. Let me just read a couple comments here to illustrate the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset. So fixed mindset would say, I'm only good at certain things, or I give up when it's too hard, or I take feedback and criticism personally. Whereas growth mindset says, look, I can be good at anything as long as I'm learning from my mistakes and I'm investing in my development. As long as I take on board feedback and criticism that I'm getting from people, that's a lot of what powers my growth mindset and the ability for me to get better. So growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I think all of us as entrepreneurs naturally have growth mindset where hopefully we're learning from, our evolution toward product market fit and getting customer feedback. And when we make pitches, we get feedback from investors and so forth. The only way that that's going to help us as entrepreneurs is that we adopt this growth mindset mentality and learn from that feedback. The last thing that I want to focus on as leaders, your leadership development, is your personal development. How do you develop yourself? So I characterize it into two things. I'm not an academic, so there might be a better term for this, but I call it hard development. And I'll contrast that with the next slide, a different kind of development. So hard development really is about more and better facts and skills and industry expertise and competition, understanding the competition, strategic thinking, etc. So hard development, the hard skills that you can get better at is one way that you're going to develop yourself. Okay, you're going to get more facts. You're going to understand the industry that you're in a little bit better. You're going to understand what competitors are doing and why you're making a different choice than them, or why you're following them, perhaps. You're going to get better at strategic thinking. You're going to get better at managing the finances of your business. All of those things you're going to get better at. And those are hard skills that I think anybody watching YouTube or reading or getting a mentor, whatever, can get better at those hard skills. And I want you to contrast those, though, with enlightened skills. Sometimes people hear soft skills and these leadership evolutions in terms of soft skills. I'm not going to call them soft skills because I think soft kind of diminishes the value of what we're talking about here. So I'm going to call them enlightened skills, enlightened development. And I think there's 5 stages that people go through in leaders as a leader. The first is being impulsive, like just making a decision. Oftentimes we give ourselves credit for making a decision. That's great. Leaders need to make decisions. Sometimes they don't have all the data that they would like to have to make a good decision and so forth. And so they're able to make a decision. And so that's the first step in your leadership journey, I think, is just the ability to make a decision. Impulsive is it sounds a little bit derogatory. I don't mean it to be. It just means, in my mind, the ability to make decisions for the organization. The second thing, egocentric, is making decisions that are best for you as a leader. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a little bit unenlightened in terms of your leadership development, but not only are you making decisions, but also when you become egocentric, you're making decisions that are in the best interest of yourself. And I think everybody makes decisions that fundamentally are good for them. This egocentric step really is you're making decisions primarily, almost exclusively, because they're good for you. And a decision might be, look, I'm going to take over role as CEO. I'm going to go get this amount of funding because I think it'll help us scale to the next level. All of those things are a little bit egocentric, right? So it's not a bad thing, but they are kind of self-serving. Okay? The next thing is being reactive. So being reactive means understanding different data sources and signals that you're getting from the market and feedback that you might be getting from investors. And what you do about that to design the business or refactor your product or hire the right person, those are called reactive skills. And so that's the third evolutionary step in becoming an enlightened leader. The fourth is being creative. So being creative about maybe understanding that there's a new market that you can go penetrate. Maybe in creating win-win partnerships with somebody who might be considered a competitor. Maybe looking for ways to design the revenue model so that it's a multi-tariff revenue model that you get some money when the customer signs up and you get recurring revenue after that. You know, being creative is the next kind of step toward enlightened leadership. It also may mean being creative about putting people in the right roles in your organization. Oftentimes when you publish a job description about what you're looking for very specific criteria. The enlightened leader would more likely go out and say, look, that person is an excellent person. I'm going to hire them and build a role around that. And that's kind of an example of creativity. And then integrated. Integrated is understanding the organizational health of the team, making sure you understand how the team is meeting customer needs and working toward the culture that you have established for the organization, understanding whether or not this new industry segment is something that you want to go after. Integrated really is about taking a bunch of different dimensions into account to make the best decision for you, for the organization that you're leading. It's not about personal egocentric decisions. It really is about organizational decisions that benefit the organization as a whole. Okay, so this evolutionary step from impulsive to egocentric to reactive to creative to integrated is one of the things that I think you should be focusing on as a leader, and maybe more important than this hard development set of skills. You can hire people to do this. You need to invest in yourself in order to do this. One thing that I wanted to do is kind of a map those evolutionary steps, leadership evolutionary steps to startup phases. And so these are my startup phases. You can go online and find about 100 different kind of quintessential startup phase kind of taxonomies out there. These are mine. Hopefully they're self-evident. But in the early phases where you're identifying a problem that you're going to solve or a solution that might solve that problem, it's okay to be impulsive because you're out there trying a bunch of things and seeing what's going to happen and what's going to stick. And you might need to quickly pivot and do something else and whatever. So making decisions quickly, being impulsive, that's a skill set that is very highly regarded in those early phases. And it's okay if you're only, as an enlightened leader, only at the impulsive stage. Similarly, when you're pre-product, okay, now I have a solution, we're in the process of building a product, I might be raising money, going out and talking to customers or talking to investors in a way that says, look, I'm a strong leader, I know where we're going as an organization. It's okay to be a little bit egocentric in that phase of your startup. Similarly, reactive, getting the right signals to make sure that you're achieving product market fit. Being creative when you get to the pre-profit stage about pivoting and maybe going into new markets and figuring out what team members need to play what roles. That sort of enlightened leadership is very important. And then lastly, when you're growing as an organization, when you're growing your business, you've achieved product market fit, you have a product that's out there, you're now profitable, being more holistic as a leader to understand all the dimensions that are important for your organization, probably being an integrated leader is most important then. Okay? So hopefully that helps, but I do have a poll question for you, and that's this one. So with the previous constructs in mind, hard development and integrated development, why do you think founder CEOs are often asked to leave the companies that they originally founded? Why is that? I don't know why there are no answers to that poll. Maybe nobody wants to answer that poll question. So I'll leave it up for 10 more seconds and then I'll move on. Yeah, all those are great answers. Lack of willingness to grow. Yeah, so some of the answers there really connect with what I was just saying, and that is very similar to leadership modes that we talked about a few minutes ago. Often founder CEOs are asked to leave the companies that they originally founded because their development, their leadership development is not keeping pace with the needs of the organization. Some of you mentioned in the poll, maybe they're a little bit too impulsive. Maybe they're not invested in their own development. All of those things kind of lead to this phenomenon where unless you're growing as a leader, unless you're increasing your capabilities as a leader and growing from being impulsive to being more integrated, the needs of your company, the needs of your organization are going to quickly outpace your own abilities. Okay, so that is it on personal development. That entire section really was about you. How do you improve and become a better leader? I want to spend just a few minutes, 6-7 minutes on what your team needs here. So let's focus on that. So first question is, what do you think your team needs from you as a leader? What are some of the things that your team needs from you as a leader? I believe I opened this up so you can answer multiple times. So if you have multiple answers, go ahead and add them. Competence, yeah, absolutely. Competence, I think, leads to credibility. And so competence and credibility in my mind are kind of two sides of the same coin. Direction, yeah. Clarity, yeah, good. Vision, values. Values, I think in the context of a team, I'm going to translate that into culture. We're going to talk about culture here in just a few minutes. Okay, I will save this word cloud as part of this deck. And in fact, it's probably part of the recording that'll be posted as well. So we can refer back to that. Here's what I think your team needs from you. It needs 6 things, really. In order for you to be an effective leader of your team: vision and mission, empathy, so understanding where people are and where the team is, situational leadership, culture, flexibility, and obviously recruiting, retaining, and developing members of your team. Okay? We're only going to talk about the colored ones. We're not going to talk about the gray ones, but just to round out your picture, those are the 6 things that come to mind when I'm asked, what does your team need from you as a leader? Vision, mission, empathy, situational leadership, culture, flexibility, recruiting, retaining, and developing your team. Right? Let's talk about 3 of those right now. So empathy. Empathy really is a couple things. One is, if we go back to the previous section where I said you need to interpret and then adapt, that applied to leadership modes, for example. Being empathetic is the thing that allows you to interpret. Unless you're empathetic, you really don't have any ability to interpret what's going on, what the needs of your organization are. Okay, so empathy. This model, I love this model. I was exposed to this model when I worked for Microsoft. And in fact, that's where it came from. There's a link on this slide that you can go get the full blog about this. But this model is a set of 10 tools that you can put in your toolbox that help you be a more empathetic leader. Okay? I'm going to cover just a couple of them to illustrate what we're talking about here. But the second one from the upper left, make a habit of asking questions. If you find yourself talking more than you're listening, you're likely not being an empathetic leader. You might be commanding as a leadership mode because we have a deadline coming up tomorrow and we really need to meet it. Maybe it's not appropriate then for you to listen as much, but ordinarily you want to be listening as a leader. And so if you're finding yourself talking more than listening, maybe you should encourage yourself to focus more on asking questions instead of telling stories. Okay, so that's the one in the upper left. The bottom row, 2 from the right, understanding each person's contribution. Oftentimes, people don't contribute the way you want them to, okay? And it's not because they are misaligned. It's not necessarily because they're not motivated. It may be just because their working styles are different, or there's lack of clarity around the quality expectations you have for them, those kinds of things. And so deeply understanding each person's contribution and how it aligns with your expectations gives you a lot of signal about what you need to do as a leader in order to improve the effectiveness of that individual and maybe of that team. It may be that you don't provide enough clarity. It may be that that person isn't working toward their purpose, and so restructuring that role a little bit may help. There's a lot of signals that come from understanding each person's contribution. Okay. On the far left, bottom row, if you have a strong reaction to someone, ask yourself why. The default, and I do this too, I do this a lot too, I have to catch myself quite often, is I look for reasons to blame that person for why I have such a strong reaction to them. And instead, the empathetic leader is looking for, okay, why is it that that person is causing such a strong reaction in me? All of these tools, all 10 of these tools, I think are useful tools to have in your toolbox and can help you be a more effective leader. One thing that I did at Microsoft is we focused on one of these things a month as a team and gave each other permission to coach each other about where they were not quite applying this tool correctly, or whether there was an opportunity to apply it that we missed, that kind of thing. Okay? So look for ways, if you like this set of tools, look for ways to kind of reinforce this and share this with your team and give each other permission to use it. Situational leadership. So situational leadership is this idea that on any given task, people go through multiple development levels, 4 development levels. You might be a brand new, let's use brain surgery. You might be a brand new brain surgeon. It's my first day as a brain surgeon. I really want my manager to be with me, looking over my shoulder, telling me exactly what to do, making sure I'm not making any mistakes, etc. So first day as a brain surgeon, I really want my manager there. On the other hand, if I'm a D4, all the way on the other side of the spectrum, I'm the world's best brain surgeon. Do I really want my manager there standing by me, telling me what to do and how to do it and so forth? I probably don't. The idea behind situational leadership is interpreting the development level of your employees, of your team on any given task, and then adapting your leadership style to match their development needs. Okay? It may not be that you need to micromanage them and stand over their shoulder if they're an expert, but if they're a newbie at it, it's probably the right response. Okay? So that's the idea behind situational leadership. Very intuitive. There's a number of resources online that actually get in this in a lot more detail. But situational leadership is a very good tool to have in your toolbox because it helps you understand what your leadership needs are in a given situation with a given team member and apply the right response to that in order to help them do a better job and meet the expectations that you have for them on that task. Last thing I want to talk about is workplace culture, and then we'll shift to Q&A. I think there's 4 dimensions to workplace culture, and they're all relationships. So the first is relationship to self. So how much autonomy do you have? How much growth mindset are you encouraged to have? How much can you decorate your cubicle to your liking? The culture's ability to let you relate to yourself is one of those dimensions. Relationships to authority. This goes back to our leadership modes. Do you feel like your boss tends to get your input, tends to know what leadership mode to adapt to with the right situation? The more your leader knows how to adapt, the more you as a leader know how to adapt to those different leadership modes, can help make sure the relationship to authority is healthy in your team, in your organization's culture. Relationships to stakeholders is the next thing. Is it customer first? Do you always look for win-win solutions with partners? Do you do a good job with investor outreach and keep them informed of what's going on and welcome their input about how the team is doing? Relationship with stakeholders. And then lastly, relationships to team. And that's a lot about how you set up your reward structure. Do you encourage your team to be creative and collaborative, or do you encourage them to be competitive and outdo each other on any given task? None of these dimensions is right or wrong, but the recipe for how much you would focus on relationship to yourself and authority and stakeholders and team, that will help you develop the unique culture that you're looking for in your organization. I want to close with 6 different kind of canonical organization structures that in a lot of ways, these early stage companies went to becoming big, successful, large enterprises because of the investment that they made in culture. I'm not going to talk about each one of these today, just in the interest of time. But if you're looking for examples of company culture and how they applied different decisions on these 4 dimensions, these 6 companies will help you understand that a little bit better. All that being said, we're ready to shift over to Q&A.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. The clarity and detail were incredible. It's such a great presentation. I personally learned a lot. If you are in the audience and you have a question for Michael, please make sure to submit it in that Q&A box. We'll try to get to all of them. So right off the bat, kind of just on the subject of empathy, I'm thinking about how you might be in a situation where adapting your leadership style to individual team members can be crucial for success. So when you're leading like a high performing team and they have diverse strengths, how do you create an environment that encourages collaboration while ensuring everyone's contributions are kind of valued equally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you probably need to ask a twofold question. Now, this might not be an explicit question, but in your mind, you might need to be thinking about, okay, what do I really care about as a leader? Do I care that we got this product out the door with a given quality level on the date that we committed to? Mm-hmm. Or do I care that Johnny checked in some code that didn't break the build, right? So what do you care about, I think is the first thing. And if you care more about getting the product out, then that tends to be more of a team thing. And you want to come up with rewards that reward the team for collaborating together. You don't want to call out the hero of the day as much when you're focused on rewarding the team. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's a D1, going back to situational leadership, look, Johnny checked in his first module into the build. It's his first feature that he contributed. Way to go, Johnny. That might be an opportunity for you to credit an individual. But I think the very first question is like, what is it that you're trying to do with the particular task that you're referring to?
Right. Awesome. That's super helpful. And so, and then thinking about your communication style a little bit more, are there any like particular strategies or techniques that might be like particularly helpful in ensuring that the way you communicate as a leader is aligned with the needs of your team members and kind of considering the current situation that your business finds itself in?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably worth another 40 minutes of discussion at some point.
Absolutely.
But I'll give you just a couple of things. The first is that while I might not show up as an introvert in this call, I truly am an introvert. But being able to get yourself out of that introversion and be dynamic and engaging and whatever, It is, I think, super helpful, especially when you're trying to set the vision and maybe the pace and clarity around deadlines and those kinds of things.
Right.
Often that communication is not well served if you do it by email, or if you do it just, standing up quickly at lunchtime saying, hey, here's what we're going to work on. You really need to get some excitement around the thing that you're doing. Often is the case.
Right.
The second thing is, I think just like the 6 leadership modes that we've talked about, there is a different tone that you're setting with those leadership modes. I illustrated a couple of those on that slide. When you're kind of in this commanding mode, look, guys, tomorrow's our deadline. We need to hit it. I'm happy to bring in dinner if it means if it means that you can work late tonight, but let's do it. You, Johnny, do this. Michelle, you're on point to do this. Anna, you need to go do this. Let me know where you need help, but let's go. That is very different from, hey guys, what should we do in our next build? Which features do you think are the most important things to include? And so I think you can take a lot of cues from what leadership mode you think you need to apply given your organizational context.
Right. And I think like entrepreneurs can kind of think about their team members and kind of like how those different communication styles might be perceived and what would be the most effective way to really get your point across with knowing the complexities of the individual people that you work closely with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Love it. So kind of thinking about the growth mindset, what are some ways that you as a leader can cultivate a culture of innovation and continuous improvement, like among your team members?
I'll give you an example. I worked in I led an engineering team at Microsoft where we wanted the system to fail fast. We wanted to ship UI features, and if those were not effectively driving the behavior that we wanted to quickly tear those down and replace them with something else that was better. And so one of the things that we did was reward experiments. Like it doesn't matter how many wins you get. What we care about is how many experiments, how many bets you place.
Right.
And kind of that metaphor really applies even when you're developing a new product or positioning a new product to a different customer bases. It doesn't matter that you got it right once. What matters is that you try a lot of times and learn from the ones that don't work. And so I think coming up with a reward system, whether it's money or kudos or visibility or whatever, that really rewards trying, not so much succeeding, I think is one way to kind of drive that behavior. Now, it doesn't apply to everything. I don't think that growth mindset is appropriate in some domains, like accounting, for example, is a good one. Like you don't want people playing around with the numbers to see what best works, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the legal context is another one. You don't want people goofing around with kind of the legal ramifications of the business. But there are many things that I think you can do that apply to that growth mindset. And those are more about trying and experimenting and not about succeeding per se.
And so kind of on that note, in thinking about, encouraging that risk taking and like learning from failures, how do you kind of still maintain accountability and that focus on results among your team members?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, or tricky answer. The question itself is pretty clear.
Yeah.
But the answer, I think, is it can be tricky. I think one thing to be clear about is what are the things that you think you can afford to or you need to place multiple bets and learn from. It's not everything. Like accounting and legal, as we just said, is not everything. So first, figure out what that subset is. It's not the entire pie, it's a subset of the pie. The second thing, though, is I think there's a two-part question that you can ask. So, Michelle, this week you were going to do X, and I noticed you didn't quite achieve what you set out to achieve. It's okay, but what did you learn and what are you going to do different next time is valued at the same level or almost the same level as you getting a win.
Right. Yeah. And just thinking about like the way that affects the team member, I can totally see that as like kind of a boost in your confidence almost as your abilities.
But the accountability, I think there needs to be accountability for one, either succeeding or learning. Like pick one of those. If you didn't succeed, but you learned, that's okay. But the accountability needs to be there. You can just decide as a leader that it's okay to be accountable or hold them accountable for learning something and getting better at something versus
Yeah,
succeeding.
absolutely. Love that. So I think we have time for one more question. This person is wondering kind of about, and I think this would happen naturally as kind of like team members come and go. But can you talk about like how you kind of that manage team culture changing over time, and kind of like how that would look depending on like the maturity of the startup?
Yeah. I think one thing is to be intentional. I led a team. I was living in Europe. I led a brand new team. I was employee number one, and we grew it to 125 people. And I didn't really consider organizational culture, and so it kind of grew organically, and it was a mess.
Right.
It was a mess. And so one of my big growth mindset lessons learned from there, like I just need to kind of, what is my North Star? And it's okay that North Star moves, but what is that North Star? And am I hiring the right people that are going to contribute to that cultural North Star?
Right.
So that's one thing. The second thing is, I do think that the cultural values, the 4 dimensions that we talked about, relationship to team, authority, people, and stakeholders, like those dimensions are, in my mind, are uniform, regardless of whether you're a 1-person company or a 150,000 person company. Those are the same 4 dimensions. What you need to do to be intentional is, where's the slider on each of those dimensions, depending on where you are as an organization. If you don't have a product in the market right now and you don't have any stakeholders, then that dimension is probably set to 0. But that's what I would do, is I would play with those sliders, but using those 4 dimensions as kind of that framework.
Love it. That way to visualize it is super helpful. All right. Before we close out, kind of thinking about everything we've talked about today, if you had one thing you wanted to leave with the audience, one piece of wisdom, something you carry with you, anything really, what would that be?
I think leadership is really about flexibility, and flexibility is 2 parts: it's interpretation and the adaptation. And I illustrated that a couple times through the subtopic that I spoke about, and that is just your ability to lead really has a lot to do with your ability to flex to the situation. And that means interpreting the right thing, the right situation, or the situation correctly, and adapting correctly to the situation. So that'd be my takeaway. There's probably 8,000 takeaways, but that'd be the biggest one, I think.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing these incredible insights and speaking to our community on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today. We are sincerely thankful.
Great to see everybody. Enjoy your afternoon.
And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view by using the link in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.